recording now.
Okay, welcome everybody. So my name's Carlos. Anthony's away. If you were expecting Anthony Buzzard, but our fearless leader is on his way, hopefully later today. So we have been doing the last time, Anthony's doing the book of Galatians. I think we finished the first two chapters. So when he comes back, he can finish that. But in Galatians, Paul opens up his letters in the typical manner, thanking God the Father, and of course His Son, the Christ, the Messiah, Jesus. And there was a phrase there in verse 3, Galatians 1:4, and Paul goes on to thank Jesus for dying for our sins, and because that enabled us to be set free from this present evil age. So I want to look at that phrase, which is connected to my last sermon Bible study that we did on Genesis 6. You can find those on the YouTube if you want to. Oh, it's up there actually, youtube.com/Restoration Fellowship. The last two chats I did was on really a very dark topic, demonology. Yay.
So what's the name of the network?
There's only
this
two.
Is the password.
It's ATT something, and it ends with EXT.
So you can see that on the YouTube. So today, this is sort of a combination of
This one here, then.
the Galatians phrase, the present evil age, and the study I've been doing on Old Testament, New Testament demonology. So before we start, so basically, as you can see on the PowerPoint there, the present evil age. And there's an interesting verse in the Psalms 96:5, but actually that should be 95:5. LXX stands for the 70, the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. So apologies for that. Actually, should read Psalm 95:5 because there's a numbering disparity between the Greek translation of the Book of Psalms and the Hebrew. Anyway, the point is that in Psalms 96 verse 5. All the gods of the nations are idols, but some translations have demons. So we're going to look at why the Jews believe that behind the nations there's a demonic influence, sometimes a direct demonic direction, if you will, directing the nations. So because this subject is based on that, on the demonic powers behind the nations, first I want to make what I call an apologetic statement. So before we start, you probably have noticed in the last couple of weeks, maybe the last month, that we have had to do a lot of disclaimers. In other words, Anthony tends to read a lot of commentaries. You know, he's got actually here the Tyndale commentary. So we tend to, we're biblists, we're preachers, teachers. So we tend to, you should see Anthony's got a 10,000 book, library downstairs. So we tend to obviously refer to commentaries and so on. So you'll notice that we've been having to do a lot of disclaimers. So just remind me to do that every time we mention some other extra biblical work or evangelical work, because we're not evangelicals, we're not Protestants, we're not of the Catholic Orthodox system, which you should know by now. If you don't, just look at our statement or beliefs. Is it our beliefs tab? Anyway, so we're going to look at this present evil age. All the gods of the nations are demons. So first of all, I want to say that as Christians, we shouldn't question the integrity and sincerity of those working for the political, military, industrial complex. let alone dishonor or disobey said authorities, and I'm going by Romans 13. Now, how any Christian can reconcile working for said government with what the Bible says is between them and God. Paul says in Romans 14 and 2 Corinthians 5, each of us will give an account to God for what we do. Now, granted, there are some good, quote unquote, good governments in this world, just as there are bad ones. But for all the good they may do, it's not the kingdom of God. Indeed, in many respects, all forms of government, as we shall see, are antithetical to the kingdom. Moreover, as history clearly testifies, pointing out that the good, quote unquote, that they do tends to be temporary, doesn't mean I'm pessimistic. It just means I don't expect much from any government. So my purpose today is to remind us of the biblical precedent that all the nations of the world are under the influence of demons, as Psalms 96:5 states, led by the current world ruler, Satan himself, who Paul in 2 Corinthians 4:4 calls the God of this age. So, with that being said, hopefully that was clear.
Is that from your statement or somebody else's statement?
My apologies.
This is your statement.
Okay, so outline. I've learned to do this. This is hopefully much easier so you can follow, because there's so much information, right, that we have compiled over the decades. So we're going to go back and look at the demon terminology, because the translations, as I said before, sort of tend to hide the word demon behind the translation of idols, gods, or lords. So remember, Paul says there are many lords, there are many gods in 1 Corinthians 8. But really, sometimes, actually, usually in the context of this topic about the nations, you will see that the word there, what's behind the word idol or gods or lords. For example, if it says the idol in Egypt, they worship the idol in Egypt, for example, something like that. We'll look at some passages here. Usually the Hebrew word, and we know this by the Greek translation, is simply the demon that they worship, or the demon that is influential in the government of Egypt, for example. We're going to look at the Old Testament, the nations and demons. We'll look at the New Testament, a satanic truth question, the real world ruler. We'll look at the early views. It's good to always see if we're just making this stuff up. It's good to see that there is precedent, that nothing's new under the sun, as Solomon says in Ecclesiastes. So I think it's good to go back and look at Jewish, patristic, and church, the early churches, how they perceived these. And then, so as not to be too much of a downer today, I want to look at the wider hope. There is hope for all the nations, by the way. It's something I have come to call the widescreen gospel, or the wider hope as it's popularly known. There is hope even for these demonic, wicked nations that are ruling right now. And then lastly, so what? So how's this important to me now as Christians? What is the benefit, the practical, as of course our way of going about interacting with said authorities and governments. And I'll just warn you about certain liberal ideas that have crept into the church. Okay, so let's go to the Bible. If you got your Bible with you, we'll go to Deuteronomy 32. Actually, I'll split this up. If Michelle, you can read Deuteronomy 32. And Barbara, can you go to Psalm 106, please? We'll read a couple of passages here just to ground ourselves on the terminology regarding the word demon. So when you're ready, so we'll look at the word there, as you can see on the screen, hopefully. The word in Hebrew is Shedim or Sedim, usually translated gods. So I'm interested to see, Barbara, you have what translation?
NLT.
New Living Translation, and we have Michelle.
Hold on, everybody just lost audio, and I did too.
Okay. Are you checking the chat?
Everybody lost audio. Me too.
Sorry.
So since they can't hear us, did you say something else that's supposed to be on here that says Shadim? Because I don't see that on here either. The outline. I just have the outline. They're
Right.
saying they're
So
not seeing.
we're going to look at the.
Okay, I thought you.
It probably froze at the outline.
Yeah, I think that's what I mean. Did you mean for something else to be on here, not that?
Yeah, it would be on there. If you
Okay.
refresh, have you tried to refresh?
Well, I didn't.
the
I
page?
mean, I'm just listening to what people are saying. They said they lost their audio visual, and I just
Right.
noticed that. So
Right,
I'm
if
not.
you refresh, maybe it will come back, and also we can
I
suggest
mean, I
they
can turn mine off too.
try to refresh the page.
Yeah, if you can.
I've told them that
stop
already,
yours.
but some people were on, but now it seems like a bunch of them have lost.
Is it in red, the stream?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so we'll just keep going. Hopefully, at the top you'll see the YouTube channel, and I'll upload this later if you're having technical difficulties.
Okay. Now I'm back to where you were telling me to be beyond, but when I'm on. Okay. So
All right,
you're
sorry
on
for
now.
that,
Okay.
folks.
We're back. We're back.
All right, Michelle, can you
Deuteronomy 32, what verse?
go to verse 9, and I'll let you know there. So Deuteronomy 32.
Just so everyone knows, we paused while it was out too, so they didn't miss anything. Okay. For the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is the allotment of his inheritance. He found him in a desert land, and in the howling waste of a wilderness he encircled him. He cared for him. He guarded him as the pupil of his eye. Like an eagle that stirs up its nest, that hovers over its young, he spread his wings and caught them. He carried them on his pinions. The Lord alone guided him, and there was no foreign god with him. He made him ride on the high places of the earth, and he ate the produce of the field. And he made him suck honey from the rock, and oil from the flinty rock, curds of cows, and milk of the flock, with fat of lambs, and rams, the breed of Bashan, and goats, with the finest of the wheat, and of the blood of grapes he drank wine. Keep on?
Yep.
But Jeshurun grew fat and kicked. You are grown fat, thick, and sleek. Then he forsook God who made him, and scorned the rock of his salvation. They made him jealous with strange gods. With abominations they provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons who were not God, to gods whom they have not known, new gods who came lately, whom your fathers did not dread. You neglected the rock who begot you, and forgot the God who gave you birth.
That's good. So we'll stop there. So it's clear, right? This is
So-
the...
Presume verse 17 is what you're...
Yeah, so that's... What translation do you have again?
The New American Standard.
Right, New American Standard. And the
The old New American Standard, not the revised New American Standard.
NLT, what does it have in verse 17? Are you following?
I'm not
No?
familiar.
Okay, that's all right. Anyway, some translations do not have the word demons there. So, sometimes they have idols, I believe. They might even have gods. So this obviously is a typical Old Testament passage regarding the nation of Israel at that time being disobedient, unfaithful to the one God of Israel, Yahweh, Jehovah, however you want to say it. And they are seduced. Sometimes they go after the other gods or demons of the nations around them. So this is if there's one thing that should be clear when you read your Old Testament, is that this idolatry issue is in the bones of everyone involved. Let's go to the Isaiah, is it Psalm? Sorry, Psalm 106 tells the same story. Verse 33, please. Psalm 106, verse 33.
33. They made Moses angry, and he spoke foolishly. Israel failed to destroy the nations in the land, as the Lord had told them to. Instead, they mingled among the pagans and adopted their idols. And this led to their downfall.
Go to
Continue.
verse 37, please.
37. They even sacrificed their sons and their daughters to the demons.
Okay, that's good. So that was the New Living Translation. I don't know if Michelle has it. Others that you may have it.
Demons.
But again, it's the same issue, right? The same perennial problem of the nation of Israel in the Old Testament. So they're getting involved with the other nations. These other nations happen to be demonized. Demonic powers are in play. Sarah, can you go to Isaiah 2, please?
Barbara, what verse was that?
Sorry?
It started with 9 and 30.
33 to 37, we just read.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Psalm
37 is the one that says they sacrifice their sons and their daughters to the demons.
Yeah, that's what I
30, Psalm 106, 37.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Let's go to Isaiah 2 now, and we'll see. Basically, I'm just giving you here the context of the definition, Old Testament terminology regarding God's idols. They're demons, really. At the end of the day, they're demons. Isaiah 2, can you start verse 5, please, Sarah?
Come, house of Jacob, and let us walk in the light of the Lord. For you have abandoned your people, the house of Jacob, because they are filled with influences from the east, and they are soothsayers like the Philistines, and they strike bargains with the children of foreigners. Their land has also been filled with silver and gold, and there is no end to their treasures. Their land has also been filled with horses, and there is no end to their chariots. Their land has also been filled with idols. They worship the work of their hands, that which their fingers have made.
Verse 8?
That was 8.
Okay. Verse 7, so idols. Anyone have anything but idols in verse 7?
In 8, I think it is.
Is it 8?
Yeah.
Hold up.
Verse 8, the first line of verse 8, that filled with idols.
Mm-hmm. You all have idols.
And I have in parentheses, I've written in idolatry.
Right. All right, well, that's interesting because now we're looking at another word here. So we looked at the word shedim in Hebrew in Deuteronomy 32, Psalm 106. Here in Isaiah 2, we're in Isaiah 2, there's the word Elilim, which is an interesting word, Elilim, E-L-I-L-I-M, which is sort of, some commentators see it as a deliberate mock or a malformation of the word Elohim. So, yeah, it's usually translated idols or lords. But again, the Greek translation translates all these words, Shedim and Elilim, simply as demons. We'll look at one last one that is related to the word demon. Let's go to, Michelle, can you go to Daniel 10, please? And Barbara, Isaiah 34. So we'll look at Daniel 10. Daniel 10 is one of the visions here.
The verse.
Verse 13, and
We're looking.
go from there, please. And Barbara, have ready Isaiah 34, please.
But the prince of the kingdom of Persia was withstanding me for 21 days. Then behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left there with the kings of Persia. Is that what you want to know?
Go ahead.
Now I have come to give you an understanding of what will happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision pertains to the days yet future. When he had spoken to me according to these words, I turned my face toward the ground and became speechless. And behold, one who resembled a human being was touching my lips. Then I opened my mouth and spoke and said to him who was standing before me, O my Lord, as a result of the vision, anguish has come upon me, and I have retained no strength. For how can such a servant of my Lord talk with such as my Lord? As for me, there remains just now no strength in me, nor has any breath been left in me. Then this one with human appearance touched me again and strengthened me. He said, O man of high esteem, do not be afraid. Peace be with you. Take courage and be courageous. Now as soon as he spoke to me, I received strength and said, May my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. Then he said, Do you understand why I came to you? But I shall now return to fight against the prince of Persia. So I am going forth, and behold, the prince of Greece is about to come. However, I will tell you what is inscribed in the writing of truth. Yet there is no one who stands firmly with me against these forces, except Michael your prince.
Right, so here now we have the introduction of not the word demon as such, but of this prince. Now, in Greek, it's archon. This word is very relevant to this issue of nations and being controlled or influenced by demons, because in the New Testament, archon is used a lot, for example, in the letter to the Ephesians by Paul, where he talks about we don't fight with flesh and blood, but we fight against the principalities, the powers. So the archon of the heavens, he says. So this story, this vision of Daniel with the archangel Michael, it's also understood as Michael being stopped by an opposing wicked angel, as the prince of Persia here, not the prince of Persia as a human being, the prince, as the governor, let's say, of Persia, but actually a angelic force that the archangel Michael has to get past. So we'll see as we go into the New Testament.
This is like a whole sermon, just this passage in Daniel,
right,
to break this all apart. And like what
right,
is really going on here? I mean,
right.
to think about this is just amazing.
And yeah, but the focus here is on the fact that there are principalities, as Paul will call them, and there are powers behind, once again, the nations. It's all about this view of demonized nations. Now let's go to one before. Yep, we'll go to Isaiah 34. Barbara, please just start reading there. And
The beginning?
yep.
Come here and listen, O nations of the earth. Let the world and everything in it hear my words. For the Lord is enraged against the nation. His fury is against all their armies. He will completely destroy them, bringing about their slaughter. Their dead will be left unburied, and the stench of rotting bodies will fill the land. The mountains will flow with their blood. The heavens above will melt away and disappear like a rolled-up scroll. The stars will fall from the sky, just as withered leaves and fruit fall from a tree.
Keep going.
And when my sword has finished its work in the heavens, then watch. It will fall upon Edom, the nation I have completely destroyed. The sword of the Lord is drenched with blood. It is covered with fat as though it had been used for killing lambs and goats and rams for a sacrifice. Yes, the Lord will offer a great sacrifice in the rich city of Basra. He will make a mighty slaughter in Edom. The strongest will die, veterans and young men too. Their land will be soaked with blood, and the soil enriched with fat. For it is the day of the Lord's vengeance, the year when Edom will be paid back for all it did to Israel. The streams of Edom will be filled with burning pitch, and the ground will be covered with fire. Burning pitch, rather.
All right, so that's nice. That's a very bloody picture there of what God is going to do with these nations. Now, why is he going to do that with the nations of the world? Note the plural, nations. Not 1, 2, 3, but all the nations. Because at the end of the day, there's a situation here where we are in a present evil age. The nations are demonized. This is similar, by the way, Isaiah 34, if you want to do a Bible study on this. Look at this in relation to Isaiah 2, the famous Isaiah 2 of Yahweh God will administer between the nations, and he will turn their plowshares, their weapons of war into plowshares, agricultural tools, and so on. But this is a classic text of regarding this topic. Remember that we actually talked about verse, I believe, 14, when we looked at the terminology of Hebrew words that mean demon in the Greek Bible, the Greek translation. Verse 14, remember we talked about those animals behind the word, the jackals and so on, you will find the words for demons. So you will find, I think it's the word shedim there. And if you look at other translations of this verse 14 especially, you will read something like wild animals will roam there. So there are animals, yeah. But behind some of those animals, it says demons will call to each other. And there's even a demoness called Lilith in the Hebrew here.
What's the deal there? They're
So-
male and female?
Yeah, this is one of the
Demons?
unique, this is the only female represented demon called Lilith. I think this is the only appearance in the Hebrew Bible of Lilith.
So these beings can have gender, whereas we're told that angels don't. Or are we not told that? I'm just assuming
Well, yeah. Jesus said we'll be like angels who don't
we don't.
marry or so. Yeah, but
Maybe they don't marry, but maybe they still have some sort of gender.
well here, yeah, it's a demoness. The night demon Lilith
Yeah, it's Lilith.
will find a place of rest for herself. Also note verse 1 and 12 has this word archon related to the Daniel 10. It talks about rulers. Archontes is the word there. The point being that Isaiah 34 is telling a story of how the wrath of God will come against the nations. But before it does, note that Isaiah sees a vision of a heavenly war first. See verse 5, my sword has drunk its fill in the heavens. Behold, it descends for judgment upon Edom. It reminds me of the vision in the Apocalypse of John, where remember as Jesus comes back, he comes back already with his clothes dipped in blood, remember? So the point here that it's that God will first destroy the demonic powers in the heavens, on earth, under the earth, that are behind also the wicked nations, and then he'll deal with humans, with us specifically, with the governors, with the kings, with the political military powers, and destroy them. There's an interesting rabbinic paraphrase of a passage in Exodus 15. In the future, the Holy One, blessed be He, will punish the kingdoms only after He has first punished their guardian angels. As it is said, and it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord will punish the host of the high heaven on high, and only afterwards the kings of the earth upon the earth. So this is a rabbinic paraphrase of Exodus 15, verse 1. And the rabbis there cite also Isaiah 24:21, and so on. And you can find that in the book, a book called Naming the Powers. Naming the Powers by Wink, as in your eye winks. Yes.
Want me to read that? Isaiah 24:21. It's
Yeah,
it's
sure.
good scripture.
Mm-hmm.
It's Isaiah 24:21. So it will happen in that day that the Lord will punish the host of heaven on high, and the kings of the earth, and the kings of the earth on earth.
Mm-hmm. There you go. So it's an interesting view there where
There's more read on there, but anyway,
God's going to deal with.
that's kind of.
All right, let's go to your handout there. As you can see at the top of the handout, and the handout can be found online, honey. I left the RF blog. So you got page 1 of 2. So you see at the top. So we're at page 1. And Barbara, can you read the first quote there by Unger commentary?
Yes, Unger's commentary on the Old Testament. The supernatural powers of evil behind the Persian gods and idols were demons. The dynamic of idolatry
You don't have to cite the verse.
and active agents in the government of the satanic world system of which the nations are a part.
Sarah, can you read the next one, please? Dictionary of deities, demons in the Bible.
As the gods of the nations were demonized, so demons are said to be idols, Elohim in Hebrew. The LXX of Isaiah 65:11, Daemon, renders the Hebrew name of the pagan god of fortune, Gad.
Oh, fortune. Yes, sorry, that's
Okay.
it should be fortune.
Fortune.
In your handout.
Are we reading on?
Yep,
I'm
we're on
sorry, I'm
the
trying to
page
find
one handout.
Where the Israelites are said to have been preparing a table for the demon, this conception of table fellowship with pagan gods who are in reality demons carries over into the New Testament, 1 Corinthians 10. That which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons. Paul sets in opposition the table of the Lord and the table of demons.
Right, so this is serious stuff, right? This is a demonic world. The nations are being either, by the way, demonized, just to be clear, demonized simply, in my mind anyway, means influence, right? If you're demonized, you're being influenced by a wicked, sometimes, as we saw with the Nephilim and all that stuff of Genesis 6, sometimes by invisible, disembodied demons, as it looks to be the case. Some demons are in that form, have been retained in that form for the day of judgment, if you believe the Michael Heiser hypothesis of the children of the watcher angels being disembodied when they were destroyed in the flood. Regardless, so that's the Old Testament, right? I think it's,
Randy says, it's interesting that in Daniel 7, his vision is of 4 beasts. This reveals the demonic nature of these world systems.
Right. Beasts in apocalyptic literature, in eschatological end-time scenarios, visions that the seers, so-called seers or prophets have. Usually there's a lot of, is it metaphors? The proper, an animal representing something else, something like. So, for example, Apocalypse, you have the dragon, the great dragon. Well, is it an actual dragon? No, it actually goes on to explain that it's Satan, right? And so on. Daniel 7, was that Randy? Thanks for bringing up
Randy
Daniel.
Kasha?
Daniel 7, because there you got this picture of what? The famous Son of Man coming down, being presented to God, the Ancient of Days, and then this happens, Isaiah 34. Through this Son of Man figure, who goes on to be identified with the Messiah, God will judge the nations. And what happens there, remember? It says that He will put all the nations under the authority of the sons of the Most High God. And then you got pictures of lions and things like that, of animals, ferocious animals representing, guess what, the nations, and probably those demonic forces behind the nations. All right, let's go to the New Testament now. Let's go to Luke 4.
While you're turning there, Greg says he's heard the Jewish fable of Lilith being Adam's first wife.
Oh.
Well, that's a new one on me.
Yeah.
C. Guideman said earlier, he said, user beware, Lilith's legend continues to serve as source material in modern Western culture, literature, occultism, fantasy, and horror. That's from Wikipedia. So, yeah.
Lilith was a bloodsucker, by the way, a vampire.
Yeah, so she was a vampire. The
vampiress.
HBO series True Blood, Lilith was the first vampire.
Right.
He said she was also the evil woman on Frasier.
There was a Lilith?
Yeah,
A character called Lilith?
Frasier's ex-wife,
Really?
ex-wife, whose name was Lilith, and she was kind of
Goodness.
that sort of a being.
I wouldn't recommend naming your
Yeah,
child
it's not
Lilith,
not
by
a
the
name
way.
to name your little sweet baby girl, I think.
Michelle, can we go to Luke 4, please? So now we'll look at Luke 4, which is the famous Jesus is taken by the Spirit, by the way. That's a very important thing we miss, that Jesus is taken by the Spirit to the desert.
Starting verse 2.
Actually, yeah, just from verse 1 to
Yeah.
verse 7, please.
Okay. Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led around by the Spirit in the wilderness for 40 days, being tempted by the devil. He ate nothing during those days, and when they had ended, he became hungry. And the devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, tell the stone to become bread." And Jesus answered him, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone." And he led him up and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. And the devil said to him, "I will give you all this domain and its glory, for it has been handed over to me, and I give it to whomever I wish. Therefore, if you worship before me, it shall be yours." Jesus answered him, "It is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only."
All right, so is this a satanic truth or a satanic lie? Now, you got to think about this, because what we just read in the Old, I mean, we just read a scant, little, but if we study the Old Testament in its true, glorious, it'll probably take a couple of year forms, you really see that the present evil age is signified, marked by demons behind the nations. Paganism has always had that flavor, let's call it. So, is Satan really telling a truth here? Did all the worldly governments really belong to him? Could he really offer them to Jesus? Now, Jesus doesn't deny this. He does say, he rebukes the worship part, but he doesn't say, wait a minute, you're not the king of me, or you're not the God of this age, to put words into Paul's words into Jesus' mouth. So we'll further look at who is the real, as the Greek says, literally it's world ruler, the cosmos krator of this present evil age. For example, I'll just give you one. 1 John 5:19, if you're writing down, is an interesting one. John says that the whole world is lying in the lap of the wicked one.
1 John
5:19. The whole world is lying in the lap, in the power, in the grip, if you will, of the wicked one. So this helps us understand why Jesus in John 18, for example, when he's facing one of these representatives of the nations, Pilate, what does he say to Pilate? Well, my kingdom does not originate from this demonic world. And then obviously one of Anthony's favorites, Revelation 12:9, says that presently the nations are being misled by Satan. So, yeah.
I just have a question.
Yeah.
So, back in Luke, where it says that Satan says that the nations have been handed over to him, do we have like a biblical place where that exactly happened? Or we just have to...
The one I go to is all the way back to Genesis, when basically Adam was the ruler, right? So it says Genesis is an account of God creates us. Mm-hmm. He puts us in the world, represented by this incredible garden. And then this snake slithers in, and then they fall for the lie that they will live forever, which means they weren't made, at that point anyway, eternal or immortal. So I would place it there. I would say that Adam, in effect, handed over the reins to Satan. What happens? Actually, it's an interesting... it's a good question with interesting results, because when that happens, remember, the creation itself starts to decay, remember? Everything, and then it says that the ground becomes dry and barren and so on. except for this little patch, this beautiful Garden of Eden, which they are driven out of. And remember, there's even an angel with a big sword or something guarding the entrance back. And they go out into what looks like a desolate, ugly world now. So I put it there. I don't know what anyone... But it's clear that from there on, and then Genesis 6, as we saw, the importance of Genesis 6 is that evil is added on top of evil. Disobedience is added on top of disobedience. The Genesis 6 event is key to the understanding that there's human evil and then there's this added evil. That just tells us how bad it is. And Genesis 6 is also telling us how evil will persist through time even. Even if there are no people, let's say, there are evil, demonic things going on in a town. Look at it like an empty town.
The reason I ask this is because I have friends who are having, issues and problems or whatever, and they're, Baptist or whatever, their evangelical friends' answers to them are always, God is in control, God is in charge, God is sovereign, just everything that happens in this world or in your life, whatever, God is in control of it. And I'm trying to, sort of refute that as an answer. I mean, yes, if you're a Christian, God should be in control of your life, and but as far as what all happens in this world around you and other people who are not godly influencing what's going on with your problems, that they're not operating in the God is sovereign plane.
Right.
They're operating in the Satan is the God of this world, causing confusion.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, God is obviously sovereign. Ultimately, He's sovereign. He's. You said something this morning about Romans 13, right? So we're looking here at how the Bible's telling us that there's demonic powers behind the nations, governments, authorities. Yet Paul in Romans 13 says, you know what? There are good things the government does. Hence my apologetic statement at the beginning. Yes, there are good things, quote unquote. This is great, right? This freedom, blessed to be in this country. I mean, this is a mansion I'm sitting in right now, folks. Incredible work that has been done with this creation outside. There are good things, yes. But ultimately, the lesson today is that ultimately we are not of this world. As you said to your friend, yes, God is sovereign, but that's not a license for me to go or it's not a license for me to believe that the little good that any government does means that I'm somehow in the kingdom now, which is what we'll get to. A lot of systems have bought into the kingdom now.
Try to explain it. Yes, God is the ultimate. I mean, He allows.
He will be.
He allows the systems in place to be in place.
Mm-hmm.
He gave Satan a position, if you will, or whatever, a domain. He tossed him down to the earth, or however you want to, whatever. You're going to explain that more today, whatever. But yeah, God is ultimately in charge of everything. But this is not
the kingdom.
The kingdom.
No.
Yet we are not under
Right.
God's domain and government, and
Isaiah 34 hasn't taken place.
The
Isaiah 2
influence
hasn't
of
taken place.
Satan and evil
Right.
is out there.
If anything, it's the anti-kingdom.
That's a
Yes.
good way of putting it. Great. Yeah. We're in the anti-kingdom. We're in the not kingdom now, and I'll talk more about that as we get through this. What was I gonna say? Yeah, so you brought up Romans 13, and what did you want to just reiterate the point?
Oh, I was just noticing how many times in that passage Paul says that the state, the government, is a minister of God to you for good. A servant of God equals the government. I'm thinking this man is living under one of the most evil governments in Rome.
Yeah.
He's calling that government a servant of God.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, and
Right.
we must
So
obey it. Yeah.
So obviously, I don't think Paul is overturning the whole of the Old Testament from Genesis teaching that we are in a present evil age, that the nations are demonized, that there is control on that level going on behind governors, presidents, whatever countries have, ministers. But there is some truth. That's why I said earlier in my opening statements that just because we say that this is the reality of the situation, doesn't mean that there's some good to government. Now, also, I think Paul in Romans 13 is also going back to Jesus' teaching of give to Caesar what's Caesar's. In other words, Jesus knew that God is allowing this. God, in a way, in a certain way, even as Paul says in Romans 13, sets those people. Remember, you can go back to that text in the Old Testament where it says God raises up, tears down kings. Right, so there is, it's not either or. It's never, remember, it's never black and white with the Jews, with their view of the world. You know, it's sort of sometimes flexible. But again, Paul was in no way, actually the early church was in no way buying into the fact that just because X emperor replaced Y emperor, and this one was better than the other one, that somehow, oh great, now I'm gonna, you know, go and teach that the present evil age is really sort of moving away from us, and we're actually coming into the Pax Romana. There was a thing called Pax Romana, by the way.
Well, the government, even though they were, we look at them as evil in a lot of ways, they did provide a stability, a stabilizing force. They did reasonably try to imprison people who, you know, murdered and stole, and you know, some form of law, so that it wasn't just a complete every man for himself. I mean, government does do that. It provides a structure.
True to this day.
Yes, so
Right.
And roads, Roman roads. I mean, they were so important for the gospel to
for the
get out.
gospel to get out,
Yeah.
absolutely. The
Yeah.
fact that they had the roads and everything,
Yeah.
it's like it might have been needed at that time. Yet, look how
Right.
corrupt it became. There were good Roman rulers for a little while too, semi-good.
Sure.
For a few of
Yeah,
them,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
Unfortunate.
still had, you know, slaves and
Yeah,
other.
exactly.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, what happened, as you're saying that, what happened is that Christians, the majority, unfortunately, said to themselves, eventually, especially, can you imagine when one of those emperors becomes Christian? They said to themselves, wow, this is, and actually I think there's some early church fathers saying, this is the kingdom now. You know, I talked about how if you read the life of Constantine by Eusebius, you'll see how he invites them to the capital of the empire to have this council, the Council of Nicaea. And Eusebius paints a very vivid picture of they're in this huge, the emperor's hall, the emperor's home, whatever. And all these bishops, hundreds of bishops from across all the known lands, Christian churches, they come to this place. These people have been persecuted for 300 plus years. And Eusebius talks about some were missing limbs, some show the scars of torture. And the emperor all of a sudden opens the political state and says, I'm one of you guys. And then they debate it for hundreds of years later. But can you imagine how they felt, how you would feel? But remember, the Old Testament, New Testament, Jesus himself says that this is not the kingdom, because those kingdoms at the end of the day are not just wicked, but they're being demonized. They're being controlled by the world ruler of this age.
I think Revelation 11:15 is key, that only at the seventh trumpet the kingdom of this world becomes the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ.
Mm-hmm.
So not till then.
Yeah.
So my point is that eventually, most of the churches, most Christians said to themselves, you know what, this government is good enough for me to go work for this government. And then we get to the Protestants. Luther, who famously wrote, you know what? It's good for a Christian to go and apply for the job of executioner, because it's better to have a Christian influence there as an executioner for the state. Now again, I'll go back to my opening statement, because how anyone can reconcile this information we're looking at, and I'm not even finished, with working for certain parts of the state, like that. Look, God will be our judge. He'll judge all of us, each one of us. Romans 14:12. So I'm just giving us a reminder of the biblical information regarding the present evil age, of which Paul in Galatians opened his letter with. By the way, he opened his letter with that message. So let's go back to Luke 4. So did Satan lie? I don't think Satan lied. Actually, that's probably the only truth he told Satan, probably. You know, I think the kingdoms are under his control. He was able to somehow give it or entice even the Son of God into it. But guess what the Son of God did? He did the same thing he did with Pilate. He said, no, my kingdom's not from around here. So Satan is the world ruler. I think that's pretty clear to most New Testament readers. We won't
Jesus never argued against that. Jesus didn't refute it and say, no, you're not.
Right. So we'll go to the early, if you go to your handout again.
Can I read a couple things from online?
Yeah, sure.
Change the subject totally.
Hope it's working.
Christian Guideman says Jesus did not refute Satan's claim to be in control of all governments, did he? I think we just answered that. He didn't. Diane says the current governments keep total chaos at bay, which allows us to share the good news of the kingdom to others now.
Yes,
So that
true.
is a good use of government. Randy says, could it be that man is still in charge of the world, per Genesis 1:26, but man is submitted to Satan's rule rather than God's rule? Satan is using man to corrupt God's purpose.
Yes.
Makes
Isn't
sense.
that a good statement? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then Christian Guideman says God is allowing the present evil age to run its course. Genesis 3:15 ? We are temporary residents / aliens awaiting the real life. So he's allowing it to run its course. Randy says Satan also employs the principle of agency. He wanted Jesus to be his agent to rule the world on his behalf.
That seems
Interesting.
yeah.
Could be.
Yep. Let's go to your handout there. We'll go to
Jesus
the
didn't fall for it.
early views. So as we are not in a vacuum, again, we always have to go to other sources sometimes. Now, these are extra biblical sources. Again, like I said with Enoch, when it came to Genesis 6, I think it's helpful for Christians to read extra biblical works, like the books should be of Enoch and Jubilees and even Maccabees, I would suggest, is a good historical marker. So Michelle, can you start us off there? We'll look at some early views with Jubilees, page 1.
For there are many nations and peoples, and all belong to God, and over all of them he's placed spirits in authority to lead them astray from him. But over Israel he did not appoint any angel or spirit, for he alone is their ruler, and he will preserve them and require them at the hand of his angels and his spirits, and at the hand of all his powers, in order that he may preserve them and bless them. End of quote. Abraham called Jacob before the eyes of Rebekah his mother, and kissed him, and blessed him, and said, Jacob, my beloved son, whom my soul loves, may God bless you, and the spirits of Mastema shall not rule over you or over your seed, or turn you from God.
Right, Mastema is another name for Satan, really. And we'll look at another name. Satan has many names, right? I think the other one we'll look at is...
Can I times a minute?
Yep.
I mean, I'm not familiar. I don't know all this, like Jubilees. I haven't read. It's saying that there's no angel over Israel, but I thought Michael was.
I think it means wicked. angels, because there are wicked ones that lead them astray.
Okay.
Yeah, but it must mean that. I mean, otherwise, I think Jubilee is
Would
needed.
God have appointed wicked angels over specific areas, or did they just go take over?
Yeah, I think this line about God Himself placed demonic influences. I think maybe this is sort of like the Pharaoh situation, where he saw that the people were so anti-God. Then he says, "Well, here you go. Let a demon guide you, or a demon lead you
And the
astray."
demons just chose where they want to go or something. It's
Yeah.
not like God appointed
Yeah.
them.
But Mastema is a sort of extra Jewish biblical title for the same demonic presence, which is the devil. So that's a very early source there, maybe 300 or so. And then you have the Qumran community. That's the other name, Michelle. So you got Mastema or Mastema and Belial. Belial or Belial, whatever. That's another, it's very prevalent in the Dead Sea Scrolls stuff that they found in the caves. So that community was very apocalyptic, by the way, the Qumrans, like the Essenes. They were very into the end days, as they called it. And they talked a lot about the current forms of government, how they were ruled by wickedness, Belial, this demon, or Satan, and they were under its control, the governing influence, and so on.
Also, Jacob was the grandson of Abraham. Maybe they're using my beloved son in a
Metaphor.
sense of
Yeah.
Yes.
not direct son.
Yeah, don't take this as scripture. The point here is just that it's interesting that the view of Jubilees is that God Himself is somehow involved with these demonic influences upon the nations, similar to the which one we saw, the earlier one. Yeah. So that's BC times. I should have called that maybe BC times to be more clear. And now when we go to your handout again, and Barbara, can you go now to the Christian patristic and just read those first two quotes, please. So you got Justin Martyr and Tertullian, and they're about 200 AD, so not far from apostolic age.
Dialogue 79. Justin proves against Trypho that the wicked angels have revolted from God. The princes in Tanis are evil angels. And further, Zechariah shows the devil stood on the right hand of Joshua the priest to resist him. And God said, "The Lord who has taken Jerusalem rebuke you." And you are aware that David said, "The gods of the nations are demons."
Actually, I'll just quickly go to the Zechariah one because it's interesting. So you got Zechariah 3, Joshua the high priest. Then he showed me Joshua the high priest standing before the angel of God, Satan standing at his right hand, either to control him, some translations, or to accuse him. Remember, Satan, Ha-Satan, is literally adversary. So someone's sort of nemesis. And then God said to this Satan adversary, it's interesting there, verse 2, Zechariah 3:2. God said, "May God rebuke you." It's similar to the one Trinitarian sees that one, Sarah, about God rained fire down from God. So that's an interesting use there of that. So the Zechariah 3, it's interesting because it's even trying to influence the nation here at the time, right? The nation of God. Did you want to say something? No. And so there's even Trypho. It's interesting. Justin proves against Trypho that the wicked angels have revolted from God. Trypho, by the way, was the Jew, right? So you got Justin Martyr in dialogue or debate, really, with a Jew who did not obviously believe Jesus was the Messiah. Note also in this passage the personality, the reality of Satan, that Satan is an individual. It's not us, it's not the flesh, as Christadelphians say. And he's represented again as an accuser as an enemy to resist his efforts for the good of the people, to thwart, to overturn the interests of the angel of God himself. So, can you read the next one, please? Tertullian, on the handout.
Is it lawful to make an occupation of the sword when the Lord proclaims that he who uses the sword will die by the sword? Is the military laurel of triumph made of leaves or of corpses? Is it adorned with ribbons or with tombs? Is it wet with ointments or with the tears of wives and mothers? It may be made of some dead Christians too, for Christ is also believed among the barbarians.
Now, that's very interesting. It sounds like a conversation we may have today with people who don't Christians who don't believe, joining military, going to war for a nation, for a country. This is echoed by a guy called Tatian, 160 A.D. He said, "I don't wish to be a king. I decline military command." Sarah, can you go to the next one, or Righteon, please? 248. And note the dates. I put the dates there for a reason, right? Because this is early on, and then this sort of disappears once the church becomes weaponized, as I call it.
Celsus also urges us to take office in the government of the country if that is required for the maintenance of the laws and the support of religion. But we recognize in each state the existence of another national organization founded by the Word of God, and we exhort those who are mighty in word and of blameless life to rule over churches. Those who are ambitious of ruling we reject. It's not for the purpose of escaping public duties that Christians decline public offices, but that they may reserve themselves for a more divine and necessary service in the Church of God, for the salvation of men.
And one of the latest ones to echo this is Augustine, 400 AD. So this is past Nicaea. Augustine said, the psalmist says, above all gods, but he adds, of the nations. Harken back to the Psalm 96, verse 5 I used at the beginning. Augustine says, meaning those whom the nations regard as gods are really demons. So the point here is that the early Christian writers, the patristic writers, and then we'll get into the Christian, what I call the Christian councils, their orders and the practice thereof. It's one thing to be anti-government, right? Which we are not. Romans 13, right? Jesus rendered to Caesar. It's one thing to be anti-government. It's another simply to, as these writers are doing, understand and teach that Christians should not get involved with said governments. You see the distinction there? There's being anti-government, back in the good old hippie days, spit on the poor soldiers coming back from Nam and all that, and oh no, I'm not going to pay my taxes, or there's that's anti-government to me, which Christians are not. We have to be law-abiding, respect authority. It's all throughout the New Testament. Paul writes to Timothy about it, obviously the Romans, etc. But then there's this other thing that we're supposed to teach ourselves and our Christian people, that we shouldn't get involved because of the precedent from the Old Testament. Now, this comes into the fore on page 2 on your handout. Just turn it around there. Barbara, can you read the Egyptian church order? Now, these are, I'll explain briefly. When the councils got together, right, and there were, I don't know, forgot the count, maybe 20 councils early on or something. A lot of councils. What happened in these councils, just to give you a sketch, is that, so you had a bunch of bishops, hundreds usually, they got together to work out questions. So let's say, I don't know, should we have communion in the evening or whatever? I mean, things like that. Sometimes there were heavy questions, like, who is Jesus? when did Jesus begin? And things like that, which is what Nicaea and Chalcedonian councils and so on. Now, when they did this, after they supposedly agreed on certain things, then they put together what they call canons or orders. So this council agreed on this list, and they put out a list and so on. So what we're going to read now are some of the church, what I call orders, or are called orders or practices that the particular council that we see here came up with. So you have two there in your handout, but there's actually more. So for the sake of time, so this is from the Egyptian church, one of the earliest, way before Nicaea, AD 200.
If someone is a gladiator, or one who teaches those among the gladiators how to fight, or a hunter who is in the wild beast shows in the arena, or a public official who is concerned with gladiator shows, either he shall cease or he shall be rejected. A military man in authority must not execute men. If he is ordered, he must not carry it out, nor must he take a military oath. If he refuses, he shall be rejected. If someone is a military governor or the ruler of a city who wears the purple, he shall cease or he shall be rejected.
After that, we had a couple of other church orders. I'll just go through them quickly. In Asia Minor, AD 300, we forbid the taking of any financial help from any of the governors of the Roman Empire because they're polluted by war. And then the Church of Alexandria in Greece, a Nazarene or a Christian may not become a soldier by order, and it's not fitting for Christians to bear arms. Now, I must say that some of these orders are a bit extreme even for me. For example, the guys who said, you know what, we're not even going to take financial help from the state because we know the state is involved in wars and we know they're demonized. So, you know, to me that would be a bit too extreme. So yeah.
Or this, if a military man wanted to convert, would have to do penitence for 10 years?
Yeah. So
I don't know what doing penitence exactly means. But
basically, you were told to sit down and shut up when you came to church. So you couldn't vote on deacons or whatever.
Yeah.
You couldn't even open your mouth. I think, if anyone wants to correct me, I think that's what the practice of penitence was in the early church.
few people.
So let's go, Sarah. So the big one. Look at this one. The council now. All these. Oh, by the way, disclaimer. All these councils we do not subscribe to when it comes, especially to God, who God is, and who Jesus and the Holy Spirit are. We do. I don't personally. Most of us biblical Unitarians do not. There are many other things, I think, in relation to women. I don't think they were very good either. So there are many things, but we're just looking at the topic at hand, which is how these early churches understood their role in relation to the state and the nations. Yep.
Someone named JTA, I'm not sure I know who that is, says, how about local government like school councils and sheriffs? How about state offices?
What about them?
I think they want to know if Christians should participate in those types of organization.
Well, we're seeing here in the early church the reason for these early views is to inform us of the fact that church and state really at one point was church and state. So they said to themselves, the state will do, the state in all of its branches, political, military. Now, I'm reducing it to political and military, by the way. Okay, so tax collectors, we know there were tax collectors.
Talk about taking up arms because the state had control of the arms and swords. It said. So I don't think in your local school board you're supposed to have weapons.
Well, nowadays, who knows? With all the shootings in the schools, so You know, they're talking about arming teachers and stuff, so I don't know.
Somebody's talking about that, but normal, everyday,
Right.
run-of-the-mill school board type
Right.
meetings.
Yeah.
Now, he's saying a sheriff does have
Yeah.
weaponry and the power to kill somebody or
Yeah.
whatever, use a weapon. So
In my view, my personal view is I'm reducing it to the political military jobs, state, local, council, whatever. So obviously a local council is political. So anything that is political, the early churches actually were a bit too extreme for my taste in terms of even taking help, financial help from the state. But yeah, when it comes to obvious things like military and sheriffs and, the bearing of arms, obviously for the early church was like, what? No one bears arms.
But not school boards or local tax.
Yeah, that's
officials.
education. That's education department if you're asking about school boards. That would be the tax collector. I don't see why that would be a problem. So, yeah. Council of Nicaea, Sarah,
and you can
read
take
this?
some of this stuff we're learning. It doesn't mean we apply every single bit of this to, we have to read this with some wisdom and
Yeah.
apply it to our situation nowadays.
Yeah.
Our state is not the church nowadays.
Right. Sarah, can you? So the Council of Nicaea, which we're against this again disclaimer, we're against Nicene Christology, specifically speaking. We are not Niceans in the Christological sense, but they had this interesting canon or order regarding this topic.
If a military man wanted to convert, he would first have to do penitence for 10 years, which was even more than the penitence of the 7 years required for someone who denied Christ under persecution. As many as were called by grace and displayed the first zeal, having cast aside their military belts, but afterwards returned like dogs to their own vomit, so that some spent money and by means of gifts regained their military station. Let these, after they have passed the space of 3 years as hearers, be for 10 years prostrators, i.e. worshippers, few people only.
And then I'll just give you quickly Apostolic Constitutions, which came much later, 390. Let a bishop, basically let a pastor or a deacon who goes to the army and desires to retain both a government position and a church position be deprived, that is, kicked out. For the things of Caesar belong to Caesar, the things of God to God. And then the Council of Chalcedon, again, disclaimer, we are not Chalcedonians, we are not Nicaeans, Chalcedonians, but in reference to this topic, Council of Chalcedon, you shall not accept military service nor any secular dignity. Again, that's a bit extreme. And if they do not repent, they shall be anathematized, which means, this was even stricter, it means damned. They should be damned. So, again, it's just, folks, this is just a view of how the early churches, from the individual to the church, understood themselves in relation to the state. I'm reducing it to the political, military, industrial complex, as President Eisenhower families called the military industrial complex. But obviously here in the orders, the church orders, obviously they were even more of a sort of extremist view regarding the church and state. So that's a very bleak picture, right? Well, it's a present evil age. So we're surrounded, it's not even flesh and blood, it's demonic, it's behind individuals, behind systems. But again, the prophetic word is, as Anthony always teaches, about the bad is very bad, very, very bad, but the good. There is a future for even all those nations. Now, since we have some time, Michelle, can you go to Zechariah 14 again? I think we were there. And Barbara, let's go to Isaiah 19. So I want to show you here how God has a plan. I don't want to sound too much like the guy Osteen or one of those fellows, but there is a plan. There is a method to this. So Zechariah 14 verses 12 to 20, please. Zechariah 14, 12
Okay.
to 20.
14:12.
Yep, to 20, please.
Now this will be the plague with which the Lord will strike all the peoples who have gone to war against Jerusalem. Their flesh will rot while they stand on their feet, and their eyes will rot in their sockets, and their tongue will rot in their mouth. It will come about in that day that a great panic from the Lord will fall on them, and they will seize one another's hand, and the hand of one will be lifted against the hand of another. Judah also will fight at Jerusalem, and the wealth of all the surrounding nations will be gathered, gold and silver and garments in great abundance. So also like this plague will be the plague on the horse, the mule, the camel, the donkey, and all the cattle that will be in those camps.
Here comes the good bit. so it was bad. Here comes the good.
But that's people against people. That's not talking about all these angelic demonic.
Right. This is still in.
Demonic angelic
Yeah.
rulers, right?
This specifically
Because
the
we don't know
nations.
about their fate too.
Yeah.
Then it will come about that any who are left of all the nations that went against Jerusalem will go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to celebrate the Feast of Booths. And it will be that whichever of the families of the earth does not go up to Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, there will be no rain on them. If the family of Egypt does not go up or enter, then no rain will fall on them. It will be the plague which the Lord smites the nations who do not go up to celebrate the Feast of Booths. This will be the punishment of Egypt and the punishment of all the nations who do not go up to celebrate the Feast of Booths. In that day there will be inscribed on the bells of the horses, Holy to the Lord. And the cooking pots in the Lord's house will be like the bowls before the altar. Every cooking pot in Jerusalem and in Judah will be holy to the Lord of hosts, and all who sacrifice will come and take of them and boil in them. And there will no longer be a Canaanite in the house of the Lord of hosts in that day.
Right. So the subject here is that day, and the beginning of this chapter, by the way, is that on that day, and at that day is the day of judgment, the day of the Lord, which becomes in the New Testament the second coming, the parousia. On that day only. That's the future, obviously. Let's go Isaiah 19, 16 to 25, please. Isaiah 19.
In that day, the Egyptians will be as weak as women. They will cower in fear beneath the upraised fist of the Lord Almighty. Just to speak the name of Israel will strike deep terror in their hearts. For the Lord Almighty has laid out his plans against them. In that day, 5 of Egypt's cities will follow the Lord Almighty. They will even begin to speak the Hebrew language. One of these will be Heliopolis, the city of the sun. In that day there will be an altar to the Lord in the heart of Egypt, and there will be a monument to the Lord at its border. It will be a sign and a witness to the Lord Almighty in the land of Egypt. When the people cry to the Lord for help against those who oppress them, he will send them a Savior who will rescue them.
Savior and a champion, mine has.
In that day the Lord will make himself known to the Egyptians. Yes, they will know the Lord and will give their sacrifices and offerings to him. They will make promises to the Lord and keep them. The Lord will strike Egypt in a way that will bring healing. For the Egyptians will turn to the Lord, and he will listen to their pleas and heal them. In that day, Egypt and Assyria will be connected by a highway. The Egyptians and Assyrians will move freely between their lands, and they will worship the same God. And Israel will be their ally. The 3 will be together, and Israel will be a blessing to them. For the Lord Almighty will say, Blessed be Egypt, my people. Blessed be Assyria, the land I have made. Blessed be Israel, my special possession.
By the way, Egypt and Assyria here are in view because they were the mortal enemy. They are the mortal enemies. If you read the Old Testament again, we're just devoting scattershot here and there. But so if presently, if the nation of Israel is one of the most secular nations on earth, right? What does that say about this present evil age? Obviously, on that, see that day, how many times the prophet, on that day, there's this day, the day has not come, obviously. So the point here is that this is what I call the widescreen gospel. Yes, it's horrible. I mean, the Zechariah one, you know, your eyes, you know, and all this stuff, horrible. But this is part of God's redemption, cleansing, but more importantly, restoration of the pagan nations of the world, including obviously present-day Israel, the Israel of the flesh. So there's this umbrella term you will find as you go through the Old Testament prophets like Zechariah and Isaiah, a reversal of fortune. That's the umbrella term. Reversal of fortune. So Jeremiah talks about Moab, Ammon, Elam. Ezekiel talks about Sodom. Remember Sodom and Gomorrah? Even Sodom. It's very important though, remnants. So when you clean something, when something is cleaned out, right, there's always something left, some residue, obviously. So look at it that way. A dirty shirt, let's call it, will be cleansed, will be made clean, and obviously the parts of the shirt will be left. Jeremiah again talks about Egypt will settle down as in former days. There's this picture in the book of Deuteronomy where it talks about how God from even the beginning gave lands to all the nations. And he says that, they say, the prophets, that God will restore those lands to those nations. So there will be nations in the
Egypt
kingdom.
will settle down as in times of old?
Yeah.
I didn't know that it ever wasn't settled down.
Right, so there's this picture that there was, from the beginning, God had in his mind that Egypt will live here peacefully, Assyria will be, so that will be restored, that situation. Isaiah 19 is key, by the way, 19, that last one. There's a triumvirate, is that the word? There's a commonwealth of nations, a real commonwealth of nations. If you're looking at the politics of today, you know, our president right now going to Europe, and, you know, there's really no commonwealth there. There's no a true friendship, a true working together, you know, etc. Again, that has not happened. So this is vital as I close here, because I want to warn all of us, whoever thinks they're standing, you know, strong and right, be careful. So let's warn all of us not to fall into this. Maybe I'll talk about this next time I'm allowed. This kingdom now thing. It's called dominion theology. This is very, very bad for us. This is what happened to the early church, as I told you. When they started seeing the benefits, wow, an emperor was converted, not really. They sold out. They sold out their faith. They started taking up arms. They started getting involved with the state in a way that demonized the churches. So
Like that, they took on pagan customs.
Well, that is a pagan custom. When you take the purple, you know, they call it the purple, the patristic. The purple was the uniform.
That's your focus. I'm talking about there's a whole other focus which has to do with the festivals, all the pagan festivals that they did, the holy days that they had. They weren't militaristic things. They were, you know.
Right. Well, to the early church, it involved that too.
Sacrificing their babies and all kinds of fertility rites and things like that.
So I want to end here by warning us of that kingdom now thing. That just because you know, there is some good to the nations. So MLK famously said, "I admired the Good Samaritan but I don't want to be one. I don't want to spend my life picking up people by the side of the road after they have been beaten up and robbed. I want to change the Jericho Road, he called it, so that everybody has a job, education, security, health. Yes, those are good sentiments to have, but we can only do that in the kingdom when our true president comes. And when the Israel of God, the spiritual Israel of God, composed of many nations, will be trying to do that in the kingdom. We have jobs, right, in the kingdom. We always talk about that. But again, we can't do that now under the current circumstances. And the early church understood that. We have to be wary of liberalism. Greg Boyd, who I admire in some respects, and will, if we got time, a quote. Greg Boyd, who was a oneness, again, I don't agree with Greg Boyd, he's now become a Trinitarian. And he has some good things to say, harking back to the demonic powers and the nations, etc. But he says, we're to transform the world. That's the goal. Our job is to live out the kingdom. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean I'm going to go and try and change it now? The job of the church is not to bring the kingdom. The job of the church of Christians is to preach the gospel about the coming kingdom. That's our job. And so on. So there's this kingdom now thing. I hope next time I get time, because it is really insidious, and it has seeped into all the systems of Christianity, by the way, just like Pentecostalism has even seeped into Baptist churches. But yeah. So what? Basically, this present world with all its evils, says Paul in Galatians as well, right? That God's Son has, in a way, rescued us, right? Spiritual speaking, obviously, we're not in the kingdom. So Paul talks about being transferred into the kingdom now, but obviously in a spiritual sense, obviously the kingdom's not here. But so to wrap this up, why is this important? Because when we accept that Satan is the god of this age, Jesus says Satan was a murderer from the beginning in John 8. He's the functional ruler of all versions of the kingdoms of the world. We can, as Boyd says, I'm reading from Boyd in your handout there, I'll just paraphrase here for the sake of time. We can make sense of the fact that the history of the world has been one of violent conflict in all of recorded history. Only a few decades have seen no major war, so we're steeped in war and blood. And then he talks about the figures, which are sickening. 200 million people in just the last couple of centuries. The blood that has been shed. He goes on to say, we fallen humans have passionate convictions that control us, lead us into conflict with others who have equally passionate convictions. We believe in our nation over against their nation, our religion against their religion, our culture against their culture, our political ideology, their political ideology. And insofar as we're influenced by the kingdom of the world, we express these passions by attempting to exercise a power over people through the nations, with culture, religion, or political ideologies. But inevitably, he says, Boyd, violence is the result. The Bible speaks much of rebellious gods, fallen principalities, powers, demons that affect what comes to pass in this world. There are gods over particular nations that are not on God's side, that do not exercise, do not exercise their dominion in kingdom-like ways, and so on. And all the while, says Boyd, look at the last line, all the while, Satan, the ultimate power over, he calls it, Boyd, the God of this age. What's he do? He watches the bloodshed with a demonic sense of amusement. It's, as a famous radio guy said, it's sick and it's getting sicker out there, folks. So, we should honor the government. I'm paraphrasing Tertullian, 200 AD. Honor the government so long as we keep ourselves free from idolatry. So I hope we can take that to heart. And I hope it was working this stream. Apologies.
So, Milk says, Kingdom Now, taken to its logical conclusion, would transform the world and remove the necessity for Jesus to return.
Yes.
That's right, of course.
No second coming.
Yeah.
It becomes preterism.
Can I mention something that this stuff about Egypt is kind of striking me?
Isaiah 19.
Because, well, the Zechariah one, the Zechariah 14 one,
Mhm.
because it talks about anybody in Egypt, any families that don't come up and worship me, they're not going to get rain, and they're not going to. So it really describes kind of in detail what's going to happen to them, as if that's really going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Not just I might do this, but it sounds
No.
like this is going to
Yeah.
happen. People are not going to come, and this is going to happen. But then in Isaiah, it's like the Egyptians will be speaking Hebrew
Mm.
and swearing allegiance to the Lord of hosts, and they're going to be all about it. So it's interesting. It does mention 5 cities of the land of Egypt. Egypt's a big place, so I guess there's going to be some people that are not in those 5 cities
Yeah.
that are going to not get rain on them and stuff, that get the bad things happen to them. It's in
Resist.
Zechariah, but yet there's other people in these cities that are going to come and worship the Lord. And I'm wondering if the reason he kind of singles out Egypt a little bit here is because of how they imprisoned his people.
Yeah.
They enslaved the people.
Yeah.
And that he wants to let Egypt know, hey, I have a place for you in my heart, even though you enslaved my people and all that
Yeah.
stuff happened. I'm okay now, whatever.
Yeah, that was, to me anyway, a couple of years ago. I mean, I had the kingdom. Anthony obviously helped me see the kingdom as the gospel. But it was only a couple of years later that I came into this what I call widescreen. Because you only hear about Israel, right? Israel, God will redeem. There's a remnant of Israel. Most of my Christian life, I just heard about that. I never heard about the remnant of Egypt or Nicaragua or Britain. So let's branch out here into modern nations. God has a plan for all the nations. And then when that opened up, and that passage is to me the classic text of this. Now I'm getting into the whole wider hope thing. You should really study that and look at the comments. The commentaries are great on this, by the way, when it comes to that topic. And it really opens up this full gospel that we're supposed to be preaching to the nations. Right? It's a gospel to the nation, not just to Israel. Oh, there's a future for you, Israel. No, it's all the nations. God is
And the nations will still be nations. That shows right there. These nations in the kingdom are still going to be nations and have their own governments under
their own language, although they speak Hebrew, but Egyptians will speak Egyptian. And that's integral.
Under the rulership of Jesus.
Right.
And then so it kind of gives a greater understanding of what we will be doing when it talks about, don't you know, you will be ruling the nations or administering or whatever, judging the nations. All these nations, instead of having these evil, demonic beings that we talked about today influencing, they're going to have us.
Right.
That's right.
Satan will be tied up. He'll be bound up. And when Satan is bound up, he's the world ruler. His host will be, in a way, bound up. They will not be influencing the nations, right?
Yet there sounds like there's going to be somebody that's not going to want to obey first. They're going to get no rain.
They're not we're not robots, so people will still have free will.
People will be people. And
it's our job to govern, though, and that's key, though, Michelle, that this whole widescreen gospel now that we're talking about is key to understanding the gospel about the kingdom. It's not about going to heaven when you die. That's not the hope. The Christian hope is never that. It's about there will still be nations. My nation will still be represented. All your nations, wherever you're from, God has a plan for them. I don't want to sound too evangelical. God, who's the guy? I always forget. But he does have a plan. Anyway, I think we should better wrap it up there.
I'll just read 3 comments.
Sure.
Greg says Christian anarchists denounce the state. Wait a minute.
Christian
Wait.
anarchists.
Denounce the state, believing it is violent, deceitful, and when glorified, idolatrous. And Christian Guidman that sounds about right. And Milk says, isn't there a difference between denouncing government lies and seeking to overthrow governments? Yeah.
Yep.
And then Greg says something about who can make war with the beast. LOL.
Oh, the Son of God. He'll
Yeah,
make
he's
war.
going to make war with the beast. That's right. Yeah.
All right, so we'll do. Are you guys singing or no? We're just closing up.
Yeah, this is,
All right, you can stop the recording. So